So Alex, thank you so much for being here with us today.
Thank you.
Yeah? So what I'd like to first understand, and for the audience's benefit, is how are you here today? How are you here? Who brought you here? How do you know us?
Well, I met Matthias, I think 10 or more years ago. The business I ran was a multi-partner loyalty business, and we ran it in Germany, in Poland, Mexico, India, and Italy. We had over 100 million consumers when I left who were active in this thing. So the principle was you have a card and you have all the big retailers in one country that give you points on the exact same card. And the consequence of that business model was that the consumers, the customers we had were large corporations, 1,000 times larger than our company. And they used to have long-term contracts, like 5 years and beyond, because we were working with their customers, with their data. And they were penny pinchers. So every time a contract came up for renegotiation, they said, oh, you're far too expensive. Next time, maximum we can pay is 20%. And if you have 5 big customers accounting for 80% of your business, who on a regular basis, every 5 years, will say that, you have a situation like this if you're smart and you stagger the contracts every year. And every year, 20% of your business is up for grabs. So I thought we might as well become professionals in doing this. So we met Matthias, and he came with a lot of structure to the process. I would say that I am more a gambling negotiator than a rational negotiator. So we had really good deals with these guys. But as the business got bigger, I couldn't negotiate myself anymore, and we learned about why that makes sense. So it was really great to have the process in a more structured way. And I will never forget, once the biggest gas station in Germany came to us and they said, hey, we need 30% less or we're out. And then we just didn't answer them. They came a year before the contract was up, and we just didn't answer. We said nothing. At your advice. And that was one of the best negotiations I had ever seen, because it was one of the first that I wasn't implicated in myself. But it was a lot of fun watching it and being the, how do you call the guy?
Decision maker and commander.
Well, I always like to be in command, so, but it was a lot of fun doing that. And negotiating with, it was a big, oil multi, I don't know how many billions of sales they have. And we were like a small digital marketing company from Germany with 300 million in sales. So it was not equal, but the result we achieved, and at the end of all negotiations, what I did is I mimicked the result and said, okay, we have given some, we have taken some. Overall, in the next 5 years, are we, with the same business level, are we going to make more money or not? And usually, every time, the little company came out making more money. So a lot of the stuff he says makes complete sense. He doesn't say some of the things that I think are really important, like the best alternative to a negotiation agreement, because if you have no alternative, then you're fucked no matter how good your process is. So you always have to think about what happens if that negotiation doesn't work out, what am I going to do then? And if you have a good alternative, then plus a good process, then I think you're really set up for success.
Fantastic. Now, Alex, if you can give the audience just a little bit of an understanding of the scale and the scope of where you started and how you got to where you are right now. So how you started, and just so they understand how, through application of the tactics, the techniques, and the mindset, what that mindset was that you had, that you ended as, the industry giant that you are now.
So, first of all, I'm not a giant because I've sold the business and I'm now just an investor. An entrepreneurial, I would hope. No, I think I was always not a bad negotiator, and when I started this business, I was a consultant, and I knew that the biggest loyalty business in Germany was Lufthansa's Miles & More. And at the time, I was a consultant for Lufthansa, so I thought, if I do this, I need immediate credibility, so it would be great to gain Lufthansa as a shareholder. And Lufthansa came to me with a proposal where they said, okay, we're going to have 75%, you're going to have 25% in the company. And I knew it wouldn't be cheap to build it up. At the time, I thought we would need 10 million Deutschmarks, which is 5 million euros in today's money, to get it launched, and then we would have a cash drain, but it would be a very strong cash flow business. So I negotiated with them to say, okay, I'm fine with that, but the cost of building the business, so we had 1 million in capital, and the rest needs to be equity, and the equity needs to be provided by those who have it. I don't have equity. All I have is the time to work and the will to make it work. But you guys have to provide the equity. And in total, the company needed 30 million Deutschmarks in equity, and if I had, and it's one of my favorite topics with startup founders. If I had 50% in the beginning, but I had to fund the equity, the money we had needed, the cash we needed through equity, I would have probably ended up with much less than I ended up at the end. Because when I sold the company, I had the same stake in the business as I had on day one. Because I found that idea with them to say, hey, you've got a lot of cash, I've got a lot of time, why don't we just merge the two? Mm-hmm. And then obviously we had all those retail contracts negotiations. Then I made the mistake of getting in bed with private equity when Lufthansa wanted to share their stake, and I don't know who of you have had experiences with private equity, but in the beginning they all tell you, we're going to be a 10-year partner, we'll support you in everything you do, no worries, we love you, we love the company, all your initiatives are great. And then over time you find out that all the successes you have are their ideas, at least if you get the wrong private equity company. All the failures you have is your failure. And when they need to launch a new fund, they will sell you no matter what. Which in this case happened. But then also we did a great negotiation because I told them I don't want to sell. And I don't want to improve the profitability of this company for you just now because you want to sell, because we were growing at 20–30% a year, and it didn't make any sense. So I said, give me the right to sell the company, you tell me your price, and I will run the sales process and I will sell the company, which they agreed to. And that was a very funny moment from then on, because I was in charge of selling the company, which is sort of a core business of a private equity, and they got really nervous. They charged a huge price for it, but we managed to get that price, and we managed to fulfill all management's hopes by having a great alternative. We had a strategic guy and another private equity absolutely wanting this business, so they fought it out. They said, okay, we pay the price, plus we agree to a lot of the things you're asking for.
What I always ask myself, when is the right time to sell a company? It's a...
So I have a big problem, and one of the reasons why I am working in the US now is because in Germany, a lot of the companies that I see are built to be sold.
Yep.
And to me, if you build a company, you want to see whether an idea works. And then you build up the idea and you do whatever you can. And you should select the right partners for building up the idea. And you find out when the right time is. Funnily enough, the private equity guys made me sell the company. I sold it to American Express. I had a 3-year earnout. And when the earnout was up, the company was 1,500 people. It was all over the world. I was still the CEO, but I had to travel and be more of a function than a person. I wasn't involved in day-to-day as much as I could be. So it was the right moment to sell. So the moment comes to you, and some people need to sell because they can only operate tiny. Other people can operate from tiny to very, very large. I'm probably in the middle of that, but you sort of get a sense to sell it. What should not happen is that investors tell you when that moment is, which is a hard advice to follow, because most investors, if they give you a lot of money, they tell you, I have the right to call a sale. What I always did with my investors, I said, you have a right to call a sale when my plan doesn't work. Because we sit here today, we agree on a plan. If I deliver the plan, then I have the right to sell. If I underperform for a certain amount of quarters or whatever, then the right goes to you. Which is very interesting because it keeps you on your toes, it keeps them on their toes, and it's not ideal, but it's the best way I found to get these guys to comply.
If you're an entrepreneur, you go through a lot of difficult sequences. And sometimes you get the feeling, oh my God, I'm exhausted, it's too much, I'm a function, not a person anymore. Is there any advice to find out, let's say, when you say, okay, it's difficult, but I have to fight for it, or it's difficult and now it's the right time to sell the company?
That's a very tough question to answer. I don't think you can derive that moment logically, because it's a lot of personal in it, okay. Right? I think when you start a company and you really want to build it, you really want to grow it big, and my company had over 1,000 people. I was lucky enough to sell it for over $1 billion. I mean, not for me, obviously. So I was lucky, and it's also, you realize how lucky you are. I mean, there were 3, 4, 5 moments when the company could have gone directly the opposite. Okay. So it's not just genius, which is why I have a problem with the amazing and fantastic. But it's also sometimes pure luck and a lot of hard work. But it's hard to say. I was always, when I had an adverse situation, I doubled down. That's naturally who I am. Okay. And I didn't double down and sell the company when it wasn't adverse, when the company was going really well, when it was, in the life of a company, there's always a moment when you're not running uphill anymore. When all of a sudden you realize the deals come to you, people come to you, investors come. You don't have to run after them. Okay. And I think when that happened, I started to lose a bit of interest. Okay.
Interesting.
That's interesting. And now you're an investor. You try to find these guys who have this power, this idea, this what kind of startups are interesting for you?
Well, so first of all, I don't think I'm an investor. Okay. The trouble is, I'm forced to being an investor because I'm 52. To start a business, you need to have a few things that you lose when you get older. You gain other stuff, but you lose some of the stuff. And I'm not sure whether I would be able to build a huge company again by myself.
Really? Come on.
I'm not sure. I'm not saying.
Full of energy.
Yeah, but so what I did was I said, okay, I will only invest in a maximum of 3 businesses, no more. Right now, I spend my time on 2 businesses. Both are in New York. And one is in the food. We're doing plant-based organic proteins, so like a food startup, which in the US is like a huge thing, because all the CPG companies, they don't manage to innovate anymore, and consumers really want new products, healthier products, etc. And the other thing is something that I learned with American Express when they asked me, can we do what you did in Europe in the United States? And I said, yes, you can, but the grocery sector is so fragmented that you need to build a virtual grocer. You need to go to all the independents, because only with them you get national distribution, only with them you're in all the big cities, but you have to collect 5,000 companies. And they thought I was crazy. So when I sold the business, I met a guy who was the founder of ICQ, the internet messenger, and he wanted to get into loyalty and artificial intelligence, and so I proposed to him to do this together, and now we're building this thing together in the United States.
Okay.
So I am building, I am operationally involved, but I'm not the CEO. That guy has my age, but he's much more of a grinder than I am, and I didn't think that was possible, but I found him.
Okay. I'm 54. I hope I'm not too old for developing my company.
No, but but you have a company. But to start something up and to go, just a desk and a phone and to work. I have 3 kids and they're 6 to 16, and to work 24/7, which I did at the time. It's not for me anymore.
Okay.
I have a question, Alex.
And Slido.com.
Yeah, and we can, if we can get the Slido up. Hindsight is 20/20, right? If I could say, Alex, if you knew then what you know now, what is it that you wish you knew? What advice would you give yourself those years ago?
You mean if you start a company?
Yeah, or even just you.
It sounds terrible, but I probably wouldn't do a lot of things differently. And it's not because I was super smart and I saw it all coming, but because I think I was lucky. And the other thing, I always have had a long-term view on things. So I never looked at, we built the business, and 3 years into the business, Bertelsmann wanted to buy us for 50 million. And the guy told me, you'll get more than I will ever make. And I said, no, I'm not finished with it. I can't. So I think the advice I would give to someone who thinks about starting a business or who has started a business is try and think long term. Try not to think valuation so much. I meet a lot of people who have huge discussions on valuation, where I always say, and there's a really nice Italian saying, you should be the tail of the tuna fish rather than the head of a sardine. Right. In other words, rather have a little of a lot than a lot of little. And that means when you negotiate with investors, first, don't believe everything they say, because they're people too. They promise to, and they usually don't. I haven't seen an investor help strategically massively, other than the guys, Lufthansa and Roland Berger. They really helped me when I started. But the guys that came after, the professional investors, they didn't really help. But there are people out there who can help you, who have ideas, who know people, who can open doors. And sometimes they're not the people with the deepest pockets, and sometimes they're not the people who are ready to pay the highest price. But try and find them, because it'll do your business good.
Okay, thank you. We have a lot of questions coming in. And I think the first one is very interesting, because you and I, before, we were talking about strategic partnerships. So the question is, how do you negotiate high-value partnerships? What's your view on partnerships?
Well, there's this Chinese saying, always know your enemy.
Right.
So if you negotiate a partnership with someone, like at the time when we negotiated with these huge retailers, I always try to understand, what is it they're going for? What is their measure of success? And let's try and give it to them on a level where they don't think they can push us around, but they think they have gained something. That's one. The second one, I was aggressive only in the beginning of the negotiation. So when you start out, and those, I don't know whether anybody here has ever negotiated with big retailers, but they can be very aggressive and unpleasant in a personal sort of way. And in the beginning, when I knew, okay, we've got 6 more months, in the beginning I was really hard in pushing back. Whereas the closer we got to the final, the more I was looking at, okay, I need to work with this guy for another 5 years. So let's try and not only give him what he wants, let's try and show him how he can sell that stuff that negotiation result internally. Let's put yourself in his shoes. And let's patch up what inevitably has been, a conflict that you went through. I'm not sure whether that's helpful for the person who asked the question. I hope so.
I think it was very helpful. We have some more questions coming in. Are your results of negotiations better when you negotiate under pressure, where you can lose all, or when you feel safe?
It goes back to that Batner philosophy, which is the only thing I took a negotiation course in Stanford. And the only thing I learned there is these 5 letters is best alternative to negotiation agreement. And if you have nothing to lose, obviously you come up with a better result because you're easier when you push back. If you have a lot to lose, then I think the process that you talked about, Matthias, becomes hugely important. Because if you separate the decision maker from the guy who's handling it, what happens is the guy who's handling it hears something that should, in theory, frighten him to death. But since he's only an agent, and since there's a higher authority behind him, and so he's essentially, you make him the messenger. So he can take that without saying, fuck, what is this guy saying? And can put up a poker face. Whereas if you're the guy who's taking the decision, you lose that face. And I think so. The only way of getting around Batner is to have an extremely structured process.
Sure. And I think that's a lot of what Matthias was talking about earlier as well. There's one question here, interesting. How do you work on good partnerships with city council? So I'm assuming a lot of your work is in the private sector, but do you have any experience in the public sector?
No, and to be honest, what I always do, there's a lot of things I dislike, and I always find somebody to do it for me. So, and city councils is part of it.
I think there is a combination. How do you negotiate a partnership with an organization your startup is a threat for them? So what's your advice?
I think that's a very tricky one.
That's a tricky one.
Because you can get carried away, and especially if you build, I imagine, I try and put myself in the shoes, so you build something, nobody believed it would work, and all of a sudden you're a threat to somebody much larger. And I think the natural tendency is you want to take it out on them. You want to feel how great you are. And that's the one thing that cannot happen. So especially if you're a threat, it's almost like if you have absolutely nothing to lose and only to gain is as dangerous as if you have everything to lose, I think. In both moments, you have to keep your composure and you have to keep your poker face and you have to stay in the zone where you can reach an agreement. Okay. And I think in both cases, in the one case where you have everything to lose, you're in danger of leaving the zone to the bad side. Whereas in the other case, you're always in danger of leaving the zone in the good side. So again, I think it comes back, and I'm actually not advertising for this guy. We haven't spoken in 5 years, I think. Not because we had a fight, but because I think I've learned the tricks.
Well, I wouldn't call it tricks.
Okay, I've learned the dire process. Okay. But it really makes sense to adhere to that process in all of these situations, I think.
Then I think we can focus on the next one. What are the 3 key essentials to prepare a negotiation with high-value partners? Number 1?
Number 1, you have to have a vision of what you're giving the other side if the negotiation works. Because that's your key selling proposition. Number 2, you have to know where the other side stands, where are their pain points, what are their pressure points, where do they think they have to gain from? For example, with those retailers, we had some very transparent pricing elements, and they were always after these. But if you have a partnership which is very complex, usually you have a lot of elements that you can negotiate. So we always said, okay, let's give in on the transparent stuff, and let's get it all back on the intransparent stuff, which they don't notice, they don't give a fuck about, and they're ready to give you. And I think the third is all about personal relationships. So no matter what you do while you're in the negotiation, once the negotiation is finished, you work together. And you cannot let the negotiation imperil that. Which in my case, I always try to, because sometimes you have to fight. And I also personally believe fighting is good, because fighting makes things clear. And fighting puts things, or as you say, fishes on the table. And you have to talk about that stuff, in private as in business. So I'm never afraid of a good fight. But at the end, you have to make sure that it's all patched up and you can work together. And the other guy sees why you did what you did, and you help him sell what he needs to sell within his own organization.
Focusing on the next question, I think it's answered already. If someone is negotiating in a very aggressive style, you love it?
I'm aggressive myself, so I would say, at least initially. I personally therefore I can understand it. Okay. And also, there's always ways to deal with aggression by putting agents in front of you. Okay. And sometimes letting time, you have to know what you can play. Sometimes it's time, sometimes it's saying, okay, so if this is what you want, then there's, unfortunately, I just got a call from this other company that wants to do that deal, and I can only do one of the two, whatever it is, but I don't think aggression is negative, and it doesn't mean that if the other side is aggressive, it doesn't mean you have to have a negative result. You just need to know how to channel it.
So Alex, I guess to wrap things up, if you could tell us a little bit about what's next for you. Where do you go from here now? What are you working on? What is your kind of vision going forward?
Well, startups, they have a, I don't know, 5 to 9 year life until they become something sellable or something that makes sense to put into someone else's hands. So I'm in the middle of it. I survived all the heart attack moments, and now both companies have double-digit $1 million in revenue. Both companies are going to triple their revenues next year. So it looks like it worked. But there's still a lot to do. And frankly, I don't know what I'm going to do after that.
Vacation on a beach somewhere,
No,
Alex.
certainly not.
No.
And
That's not going to happen.
If you would summarize all your experience in one big advice for these guys, what would it be?
Try and do some. I mean, we all know, I would be tempted to say have fun, but we all know that, you always have fun, but then with the fun comes always anywhere between 90 and 20% pain, depending on where you are, right? Probably try and see it long term, take a long-term view on what you're doing, and try to like what you're doing. And try to spin the negative stuff in a positive way. And I know, I just talked about the heart attack moments, and I remember so many times when I came back from New York and asked myself, why the fuck are you doing this? You went to the US only because you thought they were better entrepreneurs, and you get a higher multiple for when you sail, and what the fuck, and your family's in Munich. But then again, you keep doing it, and the fun appears in overcoming the challenges, I think. But that's for me. I don't know whether that's for everyone.
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, with complete and brutal honesty and transparency. A round of applause, please. for Alex Rittweger. Thank you, Alex.
Thank you.